Welcome to the Puma Prenza podcast, the Pawd. I'm your host, Rosemary Cromwell. Thank you so much for tuning into our second episode. One might be forgiven for thinking that we're past these kinds of issues in our society. The first wave of bathroom bills kind of came and went during 2016, and we've got a lot of very famous trans celebrities right now. And the world, in many ways, seems to have moved on and forgot about the issue, but this is far from the case if you've kept up with the news. Just a few weeks ago, we saw a rendition of Spam-A-Lot performed here at Maria Carrillo, and this show included the first on-stage gay couple in our school's history, which is great. But one of the men in the couple openly cross-dresses, and it was striking to me while watching that performance that if we were in Tennessee or any of these other states that have passed these really restrictive bans, that show, like that performance, would have been illegal. It was a public performance of drag, and it was one where there were minors in the audience. And that ended up being part of the impetus for this episode. As always, if you like what you hear today, or if you really don't like it, please write a quick letter to the editor and send it to thepumaprenza@gmail.com. We're always looking for any kind of feedback you guys have. If you have story tips, ideas, or comments on how we do our business, or if you want to see any and all of our content, please visit thepumaprenza.org. That's our website. That site has articles from the paper and lots of stuff that's exclusive to the web, so take a look. There's some great stuff sitting over there. Speaking of the paper, those are out in your advos now. Please stop by Mr. Hart's room N2 if your advo doesn't have any copies. If you're not a Carrillo student, go online or inquire about a subscription. During this episode, you're going to hear me make some pretty direct references to some survey data from an anonymous survey, and I want to make it explicitly clear to any staff listening or watching that the copy that I had access to did not have anybody's names on it. Furthermore, to help ensure anonymity, we're only paraphrasing responses and talking about general trends within the data during this show. And now, with all of that out of the way, I would like to introduce you to our guest, Winter Cline. Winter, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good.
Alrighty. So, before we jump in, today's episode is going to be about trans issues, transgender issues, specifically here at Maria Carrillo, touching on a little bit of the world in general as well. For the uninitiated, the world is very frightening. It is not a fun time to be trans. Just within this year, there have been 498 anti-trans pieces of legislation proposed across 49 states, and 361 of those bills are still active. 93 of them have failed, thankfully, but 44 of them have passed, including some profoundly damaging ones in Tennessee and Iowa and West Virginia. In addition, this is pretty close to a 700% increase from 2022. In 2021, there was 71 bathroom, locker room, and sports bills, 40 health bills, and 33 other bills proposed. 2022 jumped up again in each category, but this year it is far and away the sort of largest tidal wave of these kinds of legislation that we've seen. And so here at school, I think it's very important, especially because the group that we're seeing most often targeted is trans kids. It's very important that we are accepting, that we create a good culture here, that we have a good set of values going, but that doesn't always happen. That's not always the case. So you started as part of your it's ethnic studies English, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
As part of your ethnic studies English class, you created a survey to ask teachers what they feel like they need more help on, what they know, what they don't know, and what their experience with it is. So could you give the listeners a little bit of a background on that?
Yeah, so my ethnic studies English class is focused a lot on perspectives from other demographics than the ones we're normally exposed to in our day-to-day lives. So I've decided to create a resource that ultimately will be available online and in print to give teachers or adults or really anyone a better perspective on the kinds of support and accommodations that trans kids and students could really use. And so prior to the substantial development of this resource, I created a survey and distributed it to nearly all of Carrillo's staff and teachers, but also non-teacher staff. And so we can talk a little bit about the survey data.
Yeah.
But before we get any further into that, I just want to say that by no means do I want to feel as though I've infringed on the respondents' right to privacy or anonymity. As such, I will not be naming the names of any of the respondents or directly quoting them.
Awesome. Okay. So from that data, we saw that every single teacher who responded had a transgender or non-binary student. And then when you asked them if they felt like they had done a good enough job supporting those kids, what was that response like?
So the response to that was, I think, interesting, considering that, as you said, all of the teachers reported they have at some point had a trans or non-binary student. Yet only 25% of them reported that they felt just thoroughly that they had the resources and such that they needed to support these students. 25% reported that they did not, and 50% fell somewhere in between.
And that's very interesting to me, just to see the amount of people in between. I believe some of the responses were like, I feel like I've done my best, but I don't know if it's good enough, and it's they're worried about missing something, right?
Yeah, and I think if you feel like you're doing your best to support trans people in general, that's really all you can do. And you can always learn more, and you can always do more, but I think realistically, if you really feel like you're putting your best foot forward, that's fantastic.
It's so funny to me watching. I mean, people get so worried about it, and in part, rightfully so. It's a pretty complicated issue in a lot of ways, and I even find myself as a trans student getting it wrong. But allyship, to a certain extent, is kind of easy when there's just a few very main simple basic things that we're looking for, and so I always kind of feel bad for people who are trying so hard to do their best, and they're just but I don't know if I'm doing it right. I feel like I'm messing up. And that's sort of hard to, it's hard to make them feel secure in that,
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All respondents reported that they had a trans or non-binary student in the past. A quarter of them said that they had the resources. 25 said that they didn't. And so the goal of this survey was to see what they needed and provide that to them. Yes?
Yeah, just to see where all of them were coming at this, just the concept of the resource, would they use it? Would they like it? Do they feel what can they expect to see from it, and what can they hope to see from it? Right.
And did you see any trends in the data of stuff that they really seem to want, kind of on a by and large scale, or does it seem very varied in what they think they need or what they think that they're missing?
There was a lot of variety, honestly more than I was expecting, but there were some emerging trends. One of them was that it came up more than once that people felt as though it created an awkward situation if they had knowingly, accidentally misgendered or used the wrong name for someone, and they weren't sure how to navigate that, after that had happened. What should I do? Should I address it? Those sorts of things.
And I think that sort of gets into the in-class issues. To talk about my own experience, for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see this doesn't really scream Rosemary. And so I understand why substitute teachers are so often very confused when they call my name off the roll sheet and then they see me. I've gotten, really? That's you? A lot of questions, and it's always a really awkward experience, because it's yeah, I mean, it is. I know it doesn't look like it. And so that's always tricky. As far as, I think, permanent teachers, I think I've been very lucky. They don't mess up as often, and they don't, they tend not to make it weird. But I'm a senior now, so, it's a different crop of teachers. But what do you think they should do, honestly? Because I've struggled with that question myself. Because I would hate if a teacher then stopped the class for me and made a big thing out of it. That's not fun at all. It just draws more attention to it. It makes it awkward. It makes it weird. I don't think that's the solution.
Yeah, and I think, as inconvenient as it may be, I don't think there is a sort of a one-size-fits-all solution. If you find yourself coming upon these scenarios where you're slipping up with somebody's preferred terminology, you should honestly just ask them, in an appropriate setting, maybe an email, maybe just on the way out of class, like, what do you want me to do about this? And what should I do if I notice that I've made this mistake?
Aside from that, what do you think teachers are messing up the most on, or what are they like? What area are they lacking in the most?
I would say teachers and staff at large can oftentimes have a sort of foundational lack of understanding or knowledge about the subject, and that can lead to things like some teachers don't understand the idea of somebody using they-them pronouns just like on its own. And they don't necessarily agree or disagree with that as something that is right to do, but they just don't understand. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with not understanding as long as you are open to being educated and educating yourself on those things.
Right. And I see so many people who feel so bad for not just like knowing everything, but I would again like to emphasize, if you don't know, but you're open to, willing to, and like dedicated to learning, that's perfect. Like that's what we want to see. Mm-hmm. But I know a couple of responses on that surveys was just people not quite understanding it or not being familiar with how to like use them, which is interesting. And then I know plenty of people in the world who get like confused by it because they're like, oh, the multiple blah, blah, blah. Like, I can't tell who you're talking about. But as long as I think a teacher or a staff member or even a student is willing to practice and like learn it and like look up the resources, I think they're good.
Yeah. And another facet of it, I think, specifically in a school environment, is like a foreign language class, because the concepts that we have that are easily accessible in English, such as gender-neutral pronouns, simply don't exist in every language. For instance, I take French, and it's a big issue in France right now, in French-speaking places, because those words don't exist. There's no way to have it to be a gender-neutral person or speaker in those languages.
Right. And not to get off into a France tangent, but I believe they tried to create a gender-neutral pronoun, and I forget what the name for like the language academy, like that safeguards the language from change, basically. Like they threw a big fit about it and like said, no, this isn't how French works, right? That was something I read like a couple years ago when there was a bigger push to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think that can be related back to English and America and all of that, in that, people who have any sort of resistance to these concepts because they think that conflicts with the way English ought to be or ought to be spoken. Mm-hmm. I think they're sort of, at times, willfully misunderstanding the very simple fact that language is constantly changing. I mean, there's nothing implicitly negative about our language evolving over time. That's what it does.
Right. And another misunderstanding from teachers, I suppose we can paraphrase from this first survey snippet. They seemed to misguided on like what being trans was, and they seemed to conflate it with a lot of other issues, and then I don't want to say blame, but it almost felt like blame. You know the quote that I'm talking about, right? Yeah. What's your reaction to that, I guess, because you read it before anybody.
Right. I think if you find yourself conflating or sort of mixing up transness with other mental issues of people, you should probably put some time into researching that and perhaps talk to some trans people, because they couldn't be a greater difference between those things, frankly.
Right. And it's kind of upsetting seeing, like, yes, a lot of trans kids do struggle with, like, other mental health issues, but that doesn't necessarily mean they all do, but B, like, just sort of mixing those two up, and then, like, what you come away from that with is, like, I don't know, it's almost upsetting, but, like, I don't know, it's so... Getting people to understand is, like, very, very tricky. Like you can, there's a lot of people who you can show like every resource in the world. You can like point at every statistic, every study, everything, and they just like won't quite get it. Or you can give them as many lessons as you want, and they just, they're sort of stuck.
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, I guess, to that respondent, there is like a lot of overlap between those things. Like for me personally, I'm of course trans, but I also struggle with depression, and I'm on the autism spectrum, and those things all interact with each other, and they all affect each other. But it's not like the latter two damage the validity of my identity as a trans person. They're separate facets of my character. They interact with each other. They affect each other. But at the end of the day, I'm still all three of those things. And nothing will change that.
As someone who's also struggled with other mental health issues, it's like, I hate that it almost feels like it gets used against trans people a lot. Like, oh, it's just because of this thing. You're acting out because of X, Y, and Z. And it's all, the other mental health issues are used to invalidate that identity. And it's very annoying to have to explain, like, no, the three things can be true, I promise. Like, they're all separate and, yes, interacting with each other, but they're not, like, I'm not faking it, right?
Right.
So when you, were these your questions right here? Here, I'll highlight it on the doc real quick.
Thank you.
These. You had them highlighted a second ago. Was that questions from a teacher in response to one of your questions?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
So,
I mean, you can go through and probably answer a couple of these, right?
Yeah, one of the questions that I saw that I thought was very constructive and interesting was the question of what health-related resources, supplies, and those sorts of things would a transgender student like or even need during a school day to feel supported. And I think I like that question a lot. I think it's well phrased and well said, and I think it's very pertinent. And one of the biggest things, which is in some levels very contentious, but I think is very important, is adequate bathroom spaces for trans people.
This is a huge one, because I know right now at Carrillo, technically the only gender-neutral bathroom is all the way in the health office, and it's locked during the day, right? You have to get somebody to unlock it for you.
That's correct.
And this was an issue even last year. We got a lot of letters to the editor about the bathrooms. We wrote probably like 3 or 4 articles about them. I, as a trans student, I'm relatively comfortable basically just using the wrong bathroom, but I've also to an extent just given up, because if it's okay, if I gotta go, then I don't really want to walk all the way over here and then ask somebody to unlock it and then go through all of this. It's very upsetting that we don't really have that many bathrooms in general here at Carrillo for our ever-growing student body, but B, we don't have adequate full-size gender-neutral bathrooms, and I think that's we got to do something about that.
Yeah, when I was being oriented at Carrillo as a freshman, I inquired about whether or not there were gender-neutral bathroom facilities, and I was told that by the students, the seniors at the time who were running the introduction, that there was a discussion about it, and those facilities might be available, but not to bet on it. And that was kind of a sobering moment for me, because that was when I was really starting off my the transition, and I was just starting off high school, and I had this moment of realization that I'm going to have to make some compromises on my comfort and my happiness just to exist at the school. And that's something that I've been forced to be okay with, but I don't think I should have to be okay with at all.
Right. I shouldn't have to sort of give up and use one bathroom just because it's so difficult to get the adequate thing. It's very upsetting. And that feels like a very constant thing. It's there's been a discussion, but don't bet on it. And that sort of reply can be repeated across a wide spectrum of issues. It's we're thinking about helping you out, but We're probably not going to, and it's, that sucks. It's very difficult to be in your school environment, in your educational environment, and have the sort of attitude around making you feel comfortable and happy, just having that attitude be, yeah, we'll think about it. All right, question 2. What are the most challenging aspects of the school experience and or environment for a transgender student? And I suppose this probably gets into our second half point about the students, our classmates. So I'll let you get going on that.
Yeah, I think, frankly, there are a lot of options to pick from to answer that question. But for me, definitely the most impactful and challenging aspect has to be, and like Rose said, we'll get into this later, but just having to face other students, because, and this isn't really anyone's fault, it's not the student's fault, certainly, but it's not easy to look at me and presume that I would prefer to be referred to with she, her pronouns, or that I identify as a woman. And so it's kind of like every time I'm misgendered by students and that kind of thing happens, it's just sort of these subtle little blows to my confidence and my comfort. And that really wears at you. And that's...
Yeah, we can just start even getting into it right now. It does suck. I go through every day just getting misgendered, and, I personally don't try to I don't try at all. I've basically I've put my comfort and my happiness on hold just because I'm okay, this is going to be so difficult. Why bother? Which is brutal. Nobody should ever feel okay, I'm just going to wait to be as happy as I can be. I'm going to hold on, But yeah, every day, forever, for all years of my high school experience, all years of elementary, all years of middle school, it's been the same, and I don't blame them at all, but it just, it wears on you. It's a constant, it's a reminder over and over again when you interact with new people, when you interact with people who forget and slip up sometimes. It's this subtle blow that oh, right, I'm not quite there. Great.
Yeah.
And it just makes the school day a very difficult, sort of arduous process to fight through.
Absolutely.
What do you find that students seem to get wrong? Do you see that sort of accidental ignorance? Ignorance not necessarily in the way of being hateful or rude, but just not knowing. What do you see there?
I see a lot of my peers, because I'm very vocal in many of my classes, and so people will respond to things I say, and they may know that I'm trans and they may not, but a lot of the times people tend to just sort of blunder past pronouns in their sentence, because it can be a hard thing to put thought into, honestly, especially since these are people that I see every day, I don't talk to, I don't really know them, and it's they don't always catch themselves, they don't always think about it, and that's common with students, and a little less common, but still pretty common with teachers and other staff as well.
I've been lucky enough to where pretty much everybody in every single one of my classes knows me, and so I don't get it as often anymore, but I definitely used to, where people would just kind of stumble their way through the sentence, and that's okay, great, yeah, I can hear your confusion. That makes me feel great,
Mm-hmm.
And it's just that they don't know, right? The resources aren't there, or if they are there, they've never had a reason to look before. So what would your recommendation be for students who feel they don't quite know everything, but they want to know more, or they want to do better? What would your recommendation for them be?
I would advise students who feel that way to do some research on their own time, talk to any number of trans people that exist within their community. Because I can guarantee that if you don't personally know a trans person, you certainly know someone who knows a trans person. And so to just talk to these people and learn a little bit more, because if you don't directly know any trans people, it can seem like a very strange concept. And if you don't think about it a lot and you don't really understand it, that can lead you to, not out of malice or anything, but that can definitely lead you to be very ignorant of trans issues and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think just getting to know trans people and listening to them and talking to them can be hugely helpful for that.
Yeah, and I know I've rather accidentally, and sometimes it's annoying, but usually I'm very happy to help. I've become like the community rep for all of my friends. But through doing that, I've been able to explain a lot of issues to them. For instance, sports, especially school sports, all of the laws, all of the legislation, just general societal trends and things that we're seeing. Just by having them talk to me and like come ask me about stuff, I've been able to explain it to them because, they all want to do their best, but they just don't know. And being able to have them talk to me about it has been great because then, they figure it out. They get to know it. They understand it. And so often I see, rather unfortunately, in the news coverage of these issues, in the wider media world, and in how they get talked about, they often just skip over the trans people, or it's like, oh, we couldn't find one to interview, blah, blah, blah. Like, it almost feels like they don't try to get the perspective of the people who, again, are most impacted by all of these issues, all of these laws, all of these societal trends, right? It's very annoying to watch an article covering an anti-trans bill that will talk to the politician, it'll talk to somebody there protesting it, but it won't talk to a trans person from that place. And it's very weird that is continually what seems to happen. So, as a student or as a staff member, just talk to us. We're right here. And, I'm always happy to answer questions. I've said you're about the same, yeah?
Likewise, yeah.
Okay. Is there any other survey quotes, snippets, responses that you got that you want to go over and bring up?
Yeah, there was one final question that was asked, which is sort of the second half of the previous question, which was asking what the most gender-affirming aspects of the school experience and environment are for a trans student. And that's a tough one for me because there aren't that many.
Yeah. I think for me, again, I've been incredibly lucky. My name got changed on the roll sheet because I signed off a couple of emails with my counselor with my proper name, and then she straight up asked, hey, do you want me to change that for you? So shout out Miss Embry for that. She changed it on the roll sheets and in Aries and got my pronouns fixed and everything. And then since then, I haven't gotten the wrong name except by one kid who just didn't know. I didn't correct him, but he didn't know. And so that's very affirming because I can go through the whole day with, a force negating the force of the misgendering. It's like the correct name constantly. And so they kind of balance out rather nicely where it's like, oh, yeah, okay, everybody knows. Okay, I'm doing good. They're getting it right. But aside from that, there's not many.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I've had the same experience with getting my name changed and such. Again, shout out Miss Embry. But the biggest thing for me, now that you mention it, is being able to just every day, every class, several times per day, I'm logging into my Chromebook, as the average student does, and being able to just type in my preferred name to access my account is nice. And seeing it on all my papers is nice. It's nice. Feels good. That feels very affirming. And trans students in California have the right to get these things changed. Your name, your email, your pronouns within the school's system and on the roster sheet, all of that. But I know people who have had a great deal of difficulty actually accessing these things. And what was told to a particular individual that I know is that the best they could do was get his preferred name in parentheses after his dead name and not change his email. Which it's not true. That's like legally he has access to get everything changed the way he wants to. So I'm not really sure what happened there.
And just even envisioning that for myself, that would be even worse than just completely getting it wrong, right? This sort of like half attempt to get it right because it's, it feels demeaning if anything, just like, oh, we're going to, like, sort of do it for you, but not really.
Yeah.
And then having to type in, the dead name and then the alive name and, like, keep them both right there. It's just a constant reminder of, like, oh, look, see, here's what you used to be. Look at that. And that's, again, it's demeaning. It's degrading. That sounds brutal. So I guess sort of on that subject, let's get into some solutions. Yay! Firstly, there's a thing that substitute teachers have done for me a handful of times that I think is very good, and that I would hope they continue to sort of do, is they will walk around the classroom with the roll sheet and go, point out your name. And you point out your name, and then they mark you present, and that's it. No questions, no, like, there's nothing more than just point out your name, and they mark you present. That's it. There's no conversation. There's no having to raise your hand and say here in front of the whole class. And I think that's great. And if they could keep doing that, that would be awesome. As for like main teachers who are going to be with you for the whole year, they do roll however you want. You got to get to know your students' names and whatever. But for a sub who's only going to be there for maybe a class or two, just walk around the room. Do you have anything else that you think would be a good solution to sort of make the day easier?
Yeah, but before that, as a brief side note to what you were saying, I think the way that the subs were taking role in that way is fantastic for that reason, for trans students, and for the reason of, like me, fortunately, my name, Winter, is very simple. It accounts for 1/4 of the average calendar year, so that makes it pretty easy to remember and pronounce. But for some students who have names that might be more difficult for a substitute teacher to read or pronounce correctly for whatever reason, they can save themselves that awkwardness. They can save the student that awkwardness by simply saying, show me who you are on this piece of paper. I will add a check mark and we can all move on with our lives.
Exactly. Yeah, and again, I mentioned it at the beginning of the episode, but even though my name's easy to pronounce, it definitely doesn't look like it matches me. I chose a grandma name for sure. And, I had a sub at the beginning of the year who went, really? Are you sure? And then straight up asked me, what's your other name? And I just looked at him and I was like, I don't know, man. I got a lot, it's true. But like, also, what are we doing? Like, what part of that is necessary, man? You just got to take roll. I'm never going to see you again, hopefully. And so don't do that. Please, to any teachers, any students, anybody listening, don't do that, please.
Yeah, that's a fantastic example of the type of questions that you should not ask a trans person, is things like that, or like, if you ask them, it's a really weird question, but it comes up a lot, is like, what surgeries have you gotten as a trans person, particularly more so amongst adults than children. I think it's extra inappropriate to ask a kid that. Mm-hmm. But I'll get back on the topic of solutions.
While we're talking solutions, too, feel free to bring up stuff that people should not do, because that can be almost or just as helpful. But keep going.
I think that I think it should be made aware to all students what rights trans students have, because it doesn't make sense to wait for a trans student to come asking. And you can't exactly, as the administration, assume which students are trans and send them this info.
Right.
So as a part of whatever introduction to the school or presentation or assembly, those types of rights should be just common knowledge for everyone, so that trans people don't get any grief for exercising those rights, and they know that they have them and they can access them.
And on that subject, it doesn't even need to be exhaustive. It can be a very quick summary of, hey, here's a couple of things that are really helpful for you that you can access. And if you want even more information, here's who you talk to. It's annoying for so many things in the school world, but we'll stick specifically to trans issues, to have to wade through levels of people and jump through all of these hoops just to get stuff that you are legally entitled to. And so even just a quick summary and a pointer in the right direction would be huge. Can you think of anything else not to do? I've had a few weird ones, but I think I'm out on my end.
I can't think of anything else off the top of my head other than, if you have a question in mind and you've confirmed with yourself that it's a respectful question to ask, you should also confirm that you're asking it in an appropriate setting. Like, if it's a question that just the mere asking of would out the student as trans, perhaps that's best saved. Actually, that's definitely best saved for a private forum, such as an email or a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen, like, at other schools and with other people all too often, like, the question gets asked or somebody, like basically lets something slip and then everybody knows, but that kid may not have been ready to come out to everybody, or they may not have wanted to, like, confirm, like, yes, I'm trans, and just having, sometimes those questions get asked in a more public setting, and then, boom, everybody knows, and that's a nightmare. So don't do that. Anything else that schools should do, teachers should do, students should do?
I think one of the things that teachers often struggle with is knowing how to react to other students behaving problematically towards trans students. And I think that is another conversation that should be had between the trans student and the teacher. I do not think class needs to screech to a halt to address that. But I think after class or via email, teachers say, hey, are you aware that this happened? What would you like to see done about it?
Right. And I think that's great because, I would hope that the majority of students are willing to learn, they're ready to learn, they're happy to learn. But there's some who aren't. There's some who do not want to learn. There are some who would prefer to be hateful, do what they're going to do. And definitely don't stop the class and make it an even bigger situation. Because that's never the solution. If you misgender a student, please don't stop the whole class to address it. Please, nobody wants that. It makes it even more awkward. It draws more attention to the issue. If you make a mistake, just move on and fix it later. And if another student does something, unless it's very overt, very direct, very intense bullying where you would step in no matter what. If it's more of a snide remark, something smaller, I would say ignore it in the moment. If you feel confident in your knowledge of the situation and in your abilities, go ahead and hold back the transphobic student and talk to them. And that's the same way you discipline anyone for anything like that. But otherwise, and this is good advice for anything. When in doubt, ask us. Would you say that's good?
Yeah, I would definitely say that.
Okay. Do you have any parting shots, closing remarks, anything else that we didn't get to?
No, none that I can think of.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And that was our show. Thank you again for lending us your ear for our second episode. Again, any feedback you have, please send it to thepumafrenza@gmail.com. Please stop by our website and take a look at all of our content, including our YouTube documentary by Kevin Way and a mountain of articles. If you are a trans or non-binary student out there and you have anything to say, please reach out to that email address. Whether it be a letter to the editor or just some quick, thoughtful feedback, we really want to hear everything you got. Your host is me, Rosemary Cromwell. Our producer is Sophia Hughes. Thank you to Christian Bond for editing this episode. Thank you to Kevin Way and Heyman Lung for filming this episode. And thanks to Kevin for editing the video version of the show. Thank you to our teacher, James Hart, for all of your support. Thank you to Winter Cline for reaching out to make this episode possible and for joining us. And thank you for listening. We hope to see you back soon.